a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Thanksgiving Day, in the year of our Lord, 2024, I plan to drink my weight in coffee. It will be only Organic Man coffee, Trike coffee, because even though that much coffee might not be a good idea, only the best coffee will mean only the best outcome. I hope. If you'd like to join me in my new bizarre holiday tradition, you can get your supplies in right now by going to 4501 McPherson and asking for 150 to 200 pound bag of coffee. Or you can order it from organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Come to think of it, this sounds like a very bad idea. Forget drinking my weight in coffee, but I do plan on drinking a few cups of the best coffee in the universe. Join me in toasting the holidays in style without all that getting drunk, starting a fight, and spending the holidays in jail. I'll probably stop saying in the year of our Lord as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to last week's show. I was looking for some truly scary Thanksgiving stories for the show, and I found few that came up to my idea of scary. Weird, yes. Scary, no. Well, the show is called Strange Things, not Scary Things. So here are a few events to make your holidays not so hard to appreciate. Just tell yourself, no matter how bad things go, they could easily be far worse. When my class arrived in Laredo South Border Patrol Station, we increased the manpower by 300%. There had been only 15 agents when we got there, and now there were 68. To get us properly trained to actually do the job, despite all the things we had learned in those 6 months at the academy, we would go out with a journeyman to learn the real job, the things that they don't teach at the academy. This made it necessary to have 3 trainees with 1 journeyman. If we caught anyone, we would have to leave 2 agents standing on the side of the road at the scene and wait as the others took the aliens to the bridge to head back into Mexico. Once we had enough on-the-job training, which was a couple of weeks, they began putting 2 trainees together and praying that we wouldn't screw up too much. As Thanksgiving rolled around, our shift was on midnights. One of my classmates' wife decided to make turkey dinner for the whole shift. I was spending the day with my girlfriend, who later became my wife, and her family. At around 10 p.m., I excused myself from the festivities and I headed home to change and get ready for work. I always arrived at work early just because. I sat in the muster room waiting for everyone else to arrive. The supervisor was sitting at the front going over the shift schedule when the phone rang. It was one of my classmates. He said he couldn't make it in. He was feeling really sick. This was followed by another and another. Suddenly, it appeared as if everyone was calling in sick except Those of us that were there, there were three agents in the room. That was the whole shift for the night. The soup naturally took his anger out on those of us who were there. He was not a people person. Me being me, I had to make jokes about such a situation, which that really ticked him off. Me and him just never seemed to get along. Uh, well, it turned out that Thanksgiving dinner was not cooked properly. Everybody had attended the dinner, which amounted to most of the shift, had a very bad case of food poisoning. This lasted for several days, and the supervisor was not a pleasant person to be around. I did some searching for stories of bad gatherings. So, as things go wrong in your life, you can compare with others to see just how bad things can really be. I changed the names so that nobody would get all upset and start sending me nasty grams. I get enough of those already. If you recognize yourself in one of these stories, you should probably take a long look at yourself and decide if just maybe you're not a little messed up. I wonder if Vic Hermanson will do a Thanksgiving horror show on Trailer Trash Terrors. Annabelle Lee can give color commentary. Do the voices celebrate Thanksgiving? Carol, Carol, Carl and Maria were hosting Thanksgiving at their home. Carl invited his family and Maria invited hers. The house was packed. There must have been 20 people there. Carl's family said they could only stay until about 6 and then they had to run. When the turkey was ready and all the food set on the table, there wasn't much room for diners. Carl's mother suggested eating in shifts. Since Carl's family had to leave soon, they were going to go first. Maria's family hung out in the living room, eating snacks and watching a soccer game on TV. At around 5:30, Carl's family began heading out the door to their cars. Maria's family finally gathered around the table and they found nothing was left. The turkey was nothing but bones. All the sides had been consumed. Even the pumpkin pie was nothing but an empty tin pie tray. Maria quickly threw something together so her family could enjoy dinner. The following year, and all those after, Carl's family was not invited for Thanksgiving. Marcia's grandmother in law asked her to provide the turkey for Thanksgiving. Marcia and her husband had planned the morning with her folks. Then they were going to drive over to his family. Dropping off the already cooked turkey, the grandmother said that dinner should be ready by 4 p.m. Marcia and her husband finished up with her family and they drove to his family at about 3:30. Plenty of time to be there before dinner. Dinner had come and gone. The table was bare and there was nothing left, not even the bones. Bill's aunt invited all of her relatives over to her house for Thanksgiving. She lived in another state, necessitating a long drive for everyone. She kept telling them all the food and drinks were to be provided, all they needed to do was show up. Being the folks they were, everybody had offered to bring something, anything to help out. She kept saying no, she was making dinner and providing all of the needed items. The family arrived to a nice setting. There were before dinner snacks, followed by a huge meal. Once the day had turned to evening, the family began making their ways back home. About a month later, Bill received a letter from his aunt. It said he owed her $75 for the Thanksgiving feast. She had sent the same bill to all the family members who she had invited. This created a bit of a rift between the family and that one aunt. From then on, she was no longer thought of as part of the family, just that woman. Most folks will make too much food for Thanksgiving. It's considered normal to have enough food left over for at least one or two more meals. The host will usually either invite everybody back the next day for after Thanksgiving dinner, or they'll hand out containers of food to be taken home. In some families, guests will simply help themselves to the leftovers and haul away supplies for the week. Don said his aunt, uncle, and cousin show up each year, never bringing any food to add to the table. Once dinner is over, they would throw together huge piles on paper plates and head out the door. This has become their holiday tradition. Pete's mother told her sister to go ahead and take some leftovers home. She grabbed an unopened bottle of $350 whiskey from the sideboard and took it out to her car. And then she came back in. When Pete's mother pointed out the whiskey was not considered leftovers, the sister went out and brought it back, claiming she had accidentally grabbed it. When she set the bottle back on the sideboard, it was half empty. Dave says his aunt always shows up with several huge plastic containers for Thanksgiving dinner. His family would walk through the kitchen and load up their plates and then go and sit at the dining room table. As soon as everybody had sat down, she would begin loading up all the good stuff to take home. She didn't even bother with a plate, since she wasn't there to have dinner with her family. Not wanting to have a confrontation with this woman, instead of saying anything, those wishing for seconds would just take double portions of whatever they wanted. The aunt began making snide comments about everybody eating so much food. Just to show she wasn't the only weird member of the family, her 28-year-old daughter, who never interacted with anybody there for the holidays, would take all the appetizers and feed them to the dog. Nobody else got any snacks, as she would fill her plate and sit alone in the living room to eat. Eventually, the aunt and her daughter were being left off the invitation list. Ralph went with his wife to her family get together for Thanksgiving. Do I really have to keep saying Thanksgiving? That's what all these stories are about. I'll just say dinner or get together from here on out, unless I forget. Try this again. Ralph went to his wife's uncle's home for turkey dinner. He had just gotten married recently, and him and his wife were playing hosts. That's his uncle, her uncle. It was a good time, and everybody got enough to eat, followed by a gathering in the living room. There were no games on that anybody was interested in, so the hostess suggested watching the VHS tape of their wedding. She popped the cassette in, and everybody watched as the church began filling up with people, and the bride began her walk towards the altar. The tape suddenly got fuzzy, followed by a sudden change in plot. Instead of a wedding, the video began showing a memorial TV show about Dale Earnhardt. Wanting to record the event, the uncle had grabbed the first tape he found and hit record, erasing the video of their wedding in the process. I would not want to have been there after everybody else had beat a hasty retreat. There might have been a few words passed from bride to groom. As you go through life, the idea is to not make life any worse than it already is. Those of us who don't think before acting, at least to try to not erase anything from your wedding. Brenda said she invited the whole family to her place for the big dinner. Her cousin's wife went to the garage and took a giant box of individually wrapped Cheez-Its, the kind you get from Sam's or Costco, and took it out to her car. Brenda asked what she was doing, to which the woman said she thought the box was hers because she had just bought one like it the other day. Roger told about one family gathering that went sideways. The family had all gathered at his new wife's aunt's house. Everybody had brought a dish, so nobody was out too much cash. Once dinner was over, the aunt suggested making homemade ice cream. The kids mostly thought this sounded great. They got out the ingredients and they got to work. Everybody was having a good time and looking forward to a tasty treat. Once the ice cream was ready, the aunt drug out cartons of store-bought cheap ice cream. She said the kids would get the cheap stuff because they weren't able to enjoy homemade ice cream like the adults could. Their palates weren't as developed as the older folks. The kids had an appropriately sad look on their faces, seeing as they had done most of the work. As the aunt was setting out the bowls, telling the adults to help themselves, Roger grabbed a huge salad bowl and heaped homemade ice cream into it. There was hardly any left once he got done. He then grabbed a bunch of spoons and went over and sat down at the kids' table and then invited them to help him eat. His wife's aunt was extremely upset with him. She said things like, "You don't have any kids yet. You don't understand how it is." She wound up serving the cheap stuff to the adults. Roger kind of figured that this was going to be a bad day for him and his wife. He thought this was going to drive a wedge between him and his new bride. Instead, on the drive home, she told him that she thought that was the nicest thing in the world. He was a hero in her eyes. Donna told of her family that she was going to make dinner and all they needed to do was show up. She got up super early and spent the entire morning cooking food for everyone. She had all the side dishes finished and ready. The family began arriving at noon to have dinner at 3. Her brother and his entire family came rolling in at 2:30 with a huge box filled with hamburgers. He then announced that they had already eaten dinner, but they brought a few extras for everyone else. Some folks don't deserve to have nice families. I imagine Donna didn't invite her brother the following year. Have you ever seen someone take over as head of ceremonies, even when they're not asked? Don's wife announced that dinner was ready and everybody should grab a seat. Don's father's new girlfriend, let's call her Karen. She was a stranger to everyone, but she plopped down at the head of the table and then began giving orders. Karen acted as if she were the hostess and Don's wife was the waitress. She told everybody where to sit and what to do. As everybody was eating, Karen tried to direct the conversation to only things that she was interested in. Anytime anything was needed, she would tell Don's wife to go get it. Karen was being quite the bonehead. After dinner, Karen told Don's father it was time to go. There was no need for any of that after dinner conversation. Don's father apparently dumped Karen that night. Our family gets together and decide when and whose house we're going to have the festivities at, usually several weeks before Thanksgiving. The funny thing is, we never have any gatherings at our house. We have too many cats, and a few of our relatives are allergic. Somebody will volunteer to cook the bird, and the rest of us will bring dishes. I usually make rolls and either potato salad or mac and cheese, and sometimes both. As for dessert, everybody brings something, and we wind up eating too much of everything. That's what Thanksgiving is for. It reminds me of my Thanksgiving poem, the one that I didn't write. Stuff your gut with tons of food and then collapse while muscles pound. Don't blame Thanksgiving as the reason. You eat this way all year round. I did not write this poem. It was from an old Mad magazine from way back when it was still funny and not just a bunch of political garbage. If you are told to bring dessert, bring dessert. You can't go wrong with pumpkin pie, or better, apple pie, or even both. Uh, Dessert should be loaded with sugar. It should make your teeth hurt. It should be tasty and yummy, and there should be a lot of it. If all you get is a 1-inch slice of pie, somebody is screwed up. Some folks are a bit dense when it comes to dessert. Pam said that her sister was to bring dessert for the big meal in November. The family sat down to dinner, but her sister wasn't there yet. No call as to why, just an empty place at the table. 3 hours later, her sister came in with a huge plastic bag filled with frozen pierogies, and the bag had already been opened and partially consumed. It looked as if she had simply dug this from the bottom of her freezer at the last second. Okay, mashed potatoes do not enter the picture when it comes to dessert unless you're going to throw it at each other. Frozen? That's even worse. The sister never gave an explanation as to why she was so late or why she failed to bring anything yummy to the table. I guess they did without dessert that day. Some families have traditions that are beyond my comprehension. Charlie said that each year their grandmother would make banana pudding for the big family dinner. I'm going back to calling it Thanksgiving. It's getting too confusing for me. Each year, the kids would try to steal the pudding away and eat all of it, not sharing any with their siblings. As the family grew, the extents that they went to increased as well. One year, Pete snuck into the house early in the morning and tried to slip away with the banana pudding. Another time, Rachel hid the pudding under somebody's bed. Their grandmother began setting out fake pudding and hiding the real one. Eventually, the grandmother simply said that she was not going to make banana pudding anymore. The family was shocked until Evelyn said that she would make the traditional dessert. She arrived early Thanksgiving morning with a tray filled with pudding cups. Rachel grabbed the tray, ran into the bedroom, and locked the door. It turned out that Evelyn didn't know how to make banana pudding. let alone cook. The stuff in the bowls was inedible. The pudding wound up sitting on the counter until it got thrown away. I don't drink alcohol. My drinker got broken. Nobody in the family drinks alcohol much. I don't know if this is because of me or maybe they just don't see the need. Life is strange enough without adding hallucinations to it. Some families have traditional drinks that they like to serve before or after dinner. Tom said his family drink was lemon seal, a 50% alcoholic drink that everybody in the family gets a small bit of. It's 100 proof for those of you that understand this sort of thing. The proof is the amount of alcohol in a drink necessary to ignite it with a flame. Back in the bad old days, people were passing off booze that consisted of just about anything. To prove that it was really alcohol, the bartender would light the drink so the customer knew that it was the real thing and not just watered down turpentine. Why would you go as high as 200 proof? Well, that's actually a gas. I have no idea, but it's out there. Let's get back to the Thanksgiving. Tom told about one Thanksgiving when his mother invited her best friend to share the family gathering. Her family was all away and she had been planning to spend the day alone. Everybody was poured a shot glass of lemon seal and drank up. This friend picked up a wine glass and filled it to the top, and then she chugged it down. Some folks say don't drink on an empty stomach. Well, unless you're Jim from Blazing Saddles. It doesn't matter if you eat or not, alcohol is going to hit your brain and do its dastardly deeds. Tom's mother's friend wound up passed out in the corner of the living room while everybody else was enjoying dinner. By morning, she was well on her way to speaking in tongues to the porcelain thunder god. Alec told about his mother in law and her evil doings. He and his wife do the turkey thing every year, inviting friends and family. His mother in law, I'm going to call her Karen as well. There's a lot of Karens on this planet, and they all behave like, well, Karens. I know there's a few guys out there that act that way as well, and we call them dicks. I wonder how the whole Karen thing got started. Somebody had to be the first one. There must have been a few Karens out there that aren't dicks. I feel sorry for them. Karen shows up each year bringing a big bag full of food that she then tells everybody is just for her. This is not some kind of a dietary thing. She's more than happy to eat anything on the table, yet the things that she brings are only for her and her alone. Anytime she is seen leaving the bathroom, the toilet paper, soap, and the air freshener are all missing. It probably gets squirreled away in her handbag. Another woman that deserves to be called Karen, so I will, showed up for her Thanksgiving. She was family, but on the other side of things, married into the family. Al and Paula were having the family over. Karen was Paula's mother. Karen didn't much like Al's father, and she would get into arguments with him all the time. One Thanksgiving, the argument got intense. It got so bad that Karen's husband announced it was time to leave. He walked out to the car, but Karen didn't want to go. Instead, she grabbed her chest and announced that she was having a heart attack. She slumped to the ground carefully, so that she wouldn't hurt herself, and laid there as if she was on her last breath. The woman's husband was not impressed, but he did apologize for her behavior. This led to Karen pretending to begin crying for some time before eventually she simply gave up her charades and went back and rejoined the group. What would you talk about after such a demonstration of nonsense? I know what I'd be talking about, and my wife would be acting as if she didn't know me again. She doesn't like to go to the grocery store with me. I act up. I'll grab a handful of bananas and hold them up in the air and yell, "Bananas!" And then everybody in the store looks at me and my wife acts like she doesn't know me. Dolores's aunt told her sister that she was going to hell for living with a man that she wasn't married to. This was odd, seeing as she, the aunt, had lived with a few men in her time. This led to the sister storming out the door in a fit of rage and sorrow. Dolores's dad proceeded to invite the aunt to go someplace else, as in, "Get the heck out of here, you nasty woman." As the aunt was making her exit, all the neighbors were outside watching as one family after another stormed away in a hurry. Nathan had a cousin that was a dick. So I'll call him, what else? Dick. He was family by marriage. The family met at the grandmother's house. She had cooked a lot of food, but somehow Dick managed to eat far too much of it, almost to a point where others didn't get as much as they wanted. Once finished, he went outside and sat in the car waiting for his wife to come out and join him. He didn't even bother to take his plate into the kitchen, just stood up and walked out the door. The Dicks and the Karens of the world should be made to marry each other and then go live someplace else, like Siberia. If dinner is to be served at 4 p.m., it should be served at 4 p.m. I have this thing about being on time or at least early. I am a procrastinator. I understand things sometimes get a little messed up and sometimes you run a bit late, but you got to really consider other people as well as yourself. Mary was hosting Thanksgiving at her place. The family gathered and they waited for everybody to arrive. But when dinner is ready, well, it's time to eat. An hour later, the aunt came in and began yelling at everybody for eating dinner without her. Being used to this woman, the family began making jokes about her inability to arrive on time, as well as her lack of civility towards others. A family was sitting down to eat when the mother dropped the platter with the bird on it. The platter, being made from porcelain, shattered into many tiny pieces. The smart thing to do would have been throw the whole thing away and eat something else, something less liable to contain sharp, dangerous objects. Instead, the woman put the bird on a new platter and they spent their time eating and picking out broken porcelain from their food. Never mind the risk of slicing up your throat. I knew a woman that worked at a restaurant in Kima. The restaurant is no longer there. It was taken out by a hurricane, but it had Kima in the name. One day, one of the workers dropped a huge jar that they kept salad fixings in. She dropped it into the salad bowl. She meticulously picked out all the big pieces and then set the salad bar up for the people to eat. Fortunately, the cook had seen what happened, and she told her to take the entire salad bar away and replace it with less dangerous food. I believe the cook, and her name was Mary, was the only person at that restaurant with a brain. Why I remember her so well? Well, she was a character. Jill went to her grandparents' home for Thanksgiving. The entire family was there, which amounted to a lot of small kids. The young'uns ranged from 3 to 7, and they ran around this big old house like it was a playground. The adults either gathered in the kitchen to talk or they sat outside away from all of those kids. Being young and unsupervised, some of them spotted a treasure sitting on the mantel. There was a big old box that caught their attention. One of them lifted it down and opened the lid. There was some kind of dark gray powder inside. Being kids, they began scattering it around the room, saying things like, "It's snowing," or something like that. You know how kids are. It turned out the box was an urn, and the gray powder was cremains. That's the remnants of a cremation. It's a good thing the cremains were of a dead cat and not one of their relatives. Mike's family had gathered at his home for Turkey Day. They ate as much as they could and then they placed the dirty dishes in the dishwasher. As his wife was about to start the machine, she discovered the knob was broken. Not to let a small thing like this get in the way, Mike's father, Mike Sr., offered to glue it back together. He got a tube of crazy glue and he went to work, gluing the knob to his hand and his hand to the door of the machine. If you've never crazy glued yourself to anything, let me tell you, you are stuck. Trying to pull free will remove most of the skin, which is very painful. There was no way of getting Mike Sr. unstuck from the dishwasher. After trying a few home remedies to unstuck him, it became apparent the job needed expert advice. Mike got busy with his toolkit and he was able to take the door off the washer. Next, they had to get Mike Sr. to the emergency department for pain-free unsticking, hopefully. The door was too big for Mike Sr. to get into Mike's pickup, so he was helped up into the bed, where he sat, still stuck to the door, while being driven to the hospital. Once there, and after an hour and a half wait, that's why it's called a waiting room, it was the staff's turn to take a look at Mike Sr.'s hand and try to see what they could do for him. It only took them a couple of minutes with a bottle of nail polish remover that they borrowed from one of the nurses to get the hand free from the door. The next job was to get the door back onto the machine. It's a good thing they had already eaten. This turned into a very long day. George told about an adventure involving his mother and grandmother. George was away at college, and his two family members were going to celebrate Thanksgiving at a local restaurant. Being a holiday, there was a waiting list, so the two women took seats at the bar to wait. What do most people do when sitting at a bar? They ordered a few drinks. The mother looked over at the grandmother, aka her mom, and noticed the woman was unconscious. She was flopped over in her chair, unresponsive. It is now time to freak out. Panic, scream, start calling people. As the ambulance was racing to the restaurant, interrupting the paramedics' dinner, the mother called George and told him his grandmother was at death's door. Now the panic was being shared, and sharing is caring. George immediately got a hold of the airport and booked a flight home. He was close to his grandmother and worried he may never see her alive again. Before boarding the airplane home, George received another phone call from his mother. With trembling hands, he took a deep breath and hit answer. His mother proceeded to tell him his grandmother was not about to die, but in the morning she would probably wish she was. It turned out his mother had gone to the little girl's room, and while away, his grandmother had ordered another drink, followed by another drink. Her blood alcohol was 0.24, and she was passed out drunk and expected to recover soon with the grandmother of all hangovers. I have had Thanksgiving dinner at several military forts all over the country. At Fort Knox, I didn't even know it was the holiday until entering the chow hall. I didn't keep track of the dates because I didn't want to be sitting there wishing I was out of the military so soon. Instead, each day was just another day until it was time to leave. I had Thanksgiving dinner at Fort McClellan while going through the Border Patrol Academy. We refer to that day as the Thanksgiving Massacre. It lives on in infamy amongst many agents and a lot more ex-agents. To set the stage, the government had been on a hiring freeze for many years. Agents were retiring or transferring to other agencies with nobody coming in to fill their positions. Suddenly, one day, Ron said, "Well, let's hire some more of those guys in green." And hire they did. Most Border Patrol agent classes have 50 agents in them. Ours was 500. We were known as the McClellan 500, the first, the last, the only Border Patrol class to be trained at a military fort. It was not fun. We were assigned to Army barracks, 12 guys to a room. Each sector had a floor. Laredo sector was known as the 226-2. I can still hear Joe yelling it today. We ate at the chow hall, served by disgruntled soldiers who all seemed to be angry at everything and everyone. The cooks seemed to be learning how to cook as they went. The company supplying our uniforms didn't have nearly enough, so instead we were issued OD green BDUs. It was quite the sight trying to draw our pistols dressed like that. Oh, yes, the company supplying uniforms didn't have the right holsters either. They gave us holsters designed for a Ruger, but we were issued Smith & Wesson pistols. So the pistols wouldn't come out of the holsters right. We managed to survive this whole mess somehow, but it got very dicey around Thanksgiving weekend. Very dicey. Being a military base, Fort McClellan had lots of bars around the outskirts, and it also had lots of women of negotiable affections. Lots. For Turkey Day, the government put on a good show, actually serving food that was edible. I managed to eat an entire week's worth of food in one day. Then it was back to studying Spanish in the barracks. We didn't have a library or a study room. You had to put up with noisy people making noise all the time. The massacre began around this time. One of my classmates came stumbling into the room, quite thoroughly drunk, announcing that there was some female dancing naked in the day room. I figured this was probably one of our female agents who had drunk too much and was now on her way to being fired. The next day, we began hearing rumors of a woman, sin vergüenzas, or without shame, running around the buildings. She did not belong there, but a lot of people were saying she was there. There were 5 huge buildings that were housing the students to supply all of the Border Patrol sectors in the country. Being a long weekend, nobody was in uniform, so everybody just kind of blended in. Any outsiders walking around looked like they might have been from one of the other classes, one of the other buildings. That night, there were more stories going around about some female interloper who is now being sought by the staff. Every once in a while, the folks in charge would make a walk-through inspection of the barracks, as if they were looking for something. Things got real ugly that Sunday. The culprit was caught in flagrante delicto. That's Latin for blazing offense. A law instructor encountered said woman in the act, as it were. She was in the company of several students who had no way of pretending that they had no idea what was going on. One big room with 12, or rather 13, occupants. Questions were asked. Answers were demanded. Each and every one of us had to write a memo on whether or not we'd had any dealings with Miss. Should I mention her name? Probably not. I'll just call her Miss Neil Gwynn. Those caught in the act were told to hand over a list of anyone and anyone who had even come through the room. Failure to report such activity, that was against the rules. Promises were made that those who cooperated to the fullest would possibly keep their jobs. It's been 36 years since the axes fell. I think something like 68 agents were sent home without their badges. To make matters worse, the newspapers all over the country ran story after story on why and how so many trainees were sacked. These guys were returning home to wives and families who knew exactly why they got fired. Some were let go for associating with a criminal element, but most for not reporting this activity. Every Monday we had inspection in a huge parking lot. All the classes would assemble so the staff could walk around and look us over. Uniforms pressed, boots shined, that sort of thing. Of all the classes in the 226, El Paso was hit the hardest. It was their building that the events took place in. They lost more than half of their class. During inspection, they stood straight across from us in the parking lot, and we could see there were only 23 agents in a formation where there used to be 50. But that was not the end of the massacre. Agents who were suspected of having a close encounter with Miss Gwynn, but not enough evidence to send them home, had this suspicious habit of winding up with a 69 on their final tests, the minimum being a 70. All told, about 100 agents lost their jobs over a woman of ill repute. Once we arrived at our home stations, our class was looked on as being a bunch of degenerates. I didn't much care what they thought as long as I still had a job and my paycheck arrived every 2 weeks. Phil was spending Thanksgiving at his parents' farm in the middle of nowhere. It was a small farm only producing enough food for the two of them. The old barn was still standing, but nobody ever used it anymore. There was a bit of storage, and that was it. Phil had eaten his dinner and decided he wanted some alone time. Too many relatives in the house, and so he took a walk. As the sun was setting, well, you do know that it's the horizon is moving up, right? As it was getting dark out, Phil wandered over to the old barn. It kind of looked like something out of a horror movie. Phil loved horror movies, and the barn was pulling at him like a magnet. The door was never locked, and so he just pushed it to one side and stepped in. There was no electricity, but he used his cell phone as a flashlight. The barn had the usual tools hung from nails along one wall. There was a sort of a workbench, and next to that, there was a chopping block. The hatchet was still stuck in the wood. Phil looked at the hatchet, and he could see there was some kind of discoloration on the blade. Something right out of Hollywood. No, not Hollywood. This looked like the real thing. Maybe some turkey had been distanced from his head a few years ago, and the person doing the distancing hadn't bothered to clean the blade. The barn had a loft, which was half filled with hay. Phil clomb up and he poked around in the loft a bit, and then he found there was something hidden under the hay. He pushed the hay to one side. The thing hidden in the loft had a head with a face. The face was missing most of its features from long neglect. Phil was somehow able to descend the ladder without killing himself. He ran to the house to report what he had found. His father must have thought the boy was telling tales or misidentifying something, but he chose to go and look for himself before jumping to conclusions. Yep, it was a real dead guy laying in the loft. The sheriff's deputies arrived and began their investigation. The grandfather and grandmother were questioned, but they had credible stories, saying that they didn't go out to the barn anymore, not for many years. It turned out the body had been left in the loft 3 years earlier. It showed no signs of it showed signs of having been attacked using a hatchet, the one still sticking from the chopping block. The crime was never solved. The grandfolks had to live with the knowledge that they had spent 3 years living only yards from a murder scene. Plus, a murderer had visited their farm. I don't much care for parades. I've seen many and I've been in a few. My first was as a firefighter riding the back of one of our engines. I marched in a parade with the Army, and I wound up riding a float as an agent. I still don't care for them. In fact, to say that I hate parades wouldn't be a stretch. Hugh decided that he wanted to watch the local Thanksgiving parade since he had heard about it and watched it on TV for years. Most of his friends and family were away eating turkey with loved ones, and Hugh was on his own. He lived up north, and the weather was a bit cold, but at least it wasn't raining. By the time he got to downtown and found a parking spot, the crowd was lining the route. It was like a scene from a Japanese monster movie. Wall to wall people. It was an advantage being alone, since he only had to find a small spot a little bitty opening in order to see what was going on. Moving up and down the street, Hugh found a decent place standing behind a family with adequate view of the action. Standing a few feet behind the family, Hugh got the feeling that someone was staring at him. He looked around, trying to find the eyes that he felt. A short ways away, Hugh saw a man looking at him. When the man caught Hugh's eyes, he had a look of, "What are you looking at?" on his face. Hugh tried to think. Did he know this guy from somewhere? Not that he could remember. Just some big guy in need of a haircut and maybe a better set of clothes. Hugh didn't want to stare, so he would glance over every so often. Each time, the guy was staring right back at him. Hugh did his best to not look, but curiosity kept getting the better of him, and each time he looked, the man was still staring. After not looking for long as he could, Hugh looked over and saw that the man was now closer. He had walked towards Hugh when he wasn't looking. Hugh looked away for as long as he could, and then he stole a quick peek. The man was even closer. The folks around them didn't seem to notice what was going on. They were all too much into the parade. With each glance, the strange man was getting closer still. Hugh began to worry. What was going to happen once the guy got right next to him? He moved from where he had been to the far edge of the crowd. Looking over, he could see the man had changed course and was still heading right for him. They were still in the middle of a parade. There were hundreds of people around. There was no way this guy would do anything dangerous with so many potential witnesses around. Or was there? Hugh tried to focus on the marchers. Every once in a while, he would look over and see the man was still closer, until suddenly there was only one person between them, and then there were none. The big guy was now standing right beside Hugh, and then Hugh felt something sharp pressed up against his back. None of those around could see what was going on. Hugh was in a panic. What was going to happen now? The stranger leaned over and asked, why was Hugh staring at him? Hugh quickly said he didn't mean anything by it. He'd simply looked over and their eyes had kind of met. The stranger made a comment on the negative and unpleasant way. He then asked how much was Hugh getting paid to watch him. Hugh tried to reason with the man, saying he wasn't being paid by anybody and he only looked at the man when he saw him looking back. Hugh was beginning to sound scared, and several people standing close by began to take interest. Two men looked at Hugh and his tormentor, and one of them asked what was going on. The stranger looked around and tried to act as if nothing was going on. The knife disappeared, and the stranger turned and walked away quickly. One of the men asked Hugh if he was okay and who was the big guy. Hugh had no answers. He just said it must have been some kind of a misunderstanding. Hugh did lose interest in the parade. He carefully walked back to his car, being sure that the big guy was not following him. He never found out who the guy was or why he thought that Hugh was following him. Each year, Laredo holds a turkey dinner for those less fortunate. Like any free event, people show up who obviously have the means, but they want the free food anyway. I know a lot of folks who work this dinner, and they tell me about some of the people who show up. They are poor in morality and spirit, but not in cash. My nephew works at a mission. I wouldn't trade with him when it comes to jobs. Part of his duties are to check on guests, to be sure that they're not drinking or doing drugs. If caught, it's a long walk to the exit door and a warning to not come back. Mitch is not my nephew, but he does volunteer at a shelter during the holidays. It is kind of our responsibility to try taking care of those who can't or won't take care of themselves. Mitch spends the entire day at the shelter handing out food, and then he stays the night to help keep an eye on things. You'd be amazed at how many fights break out among the people with little to nothing. Mitch said he usually sees the same sad faces over and over. It's as if these people have hit rock bottom and they have no intention or no willpower to climb up out of their hole. This brings to mind personal story number 380. I kind of knew a woman, as in I saw her just about every day, on the streets. That was about as far down as you could get. She wore several shirts, one on top of the other. You could see the different patterns through the various holes. She also had on several pairs of pants as well as a dress. Her shoes didn't match. If you stood too close to her, it was a bit of a bad thing because she had that funky smell of someone who hadn't had a bath in a long time. Her clothes were in need of a good cleaning and then burning. One day, she went missing for several months. Nobody knew or cared what had happened to her. Nobody even knew if she was still alive or not. After several months, I saw a youngish, not a very old woman, waiting at a bus stop. She had that familiar look to her, and I couldn't place her. I hate to say this, but I actually stood there staring at her, trying to figure out where it was I knew her from, until the realization struck me. It was the multi-layered woman from before. She was now wearing an outfit that actually looked in good shape. She had on a pair of shoes that were in good shape as well. Her hair had been washed and combed and done up nicely, and she even had on makeup. The bus pulled up, she got on, and away she went. That was the last time I ever saw her, and I have no idea who she was or what became of her. I just hope she's on the right trail at last. Back to the shelter story. About 10 years ago, Mitch was there at the shelter doing good for those who needed help. As the usual crowd filtered in, he noticed a new face among the regulars. Not all the odds, not all that odd, seeing as most homeless are kind of wanderers. Well, free food does bring in a lot of people, and so they're not always the same folks. If they're still among the living and not in jail, they're going to show up to have food. This new face caught Mitch's attention because he was being quite rude and pushing other people around. Normal protocol was to eject any misbehaviors on the spot. Mitch was trying to be nice since it was Thanksgiving, and so he simply was being thankful that he had a house and food to go to. In order to keep the peace, Mitch cornered the man and told him to behave, or else it was back out on the streets without any food. After the confrontation, it seemed the guy had settled down. Nothing went sideways the rest of the evening or into the night until 3 a.m. One of the regulars came and told Mitch that somebody had been stabbed. Mitch ran to the room where everybody slept and he began looking. The homeless guy who'd had the run-in with the troublemaker was now no longer among the living. He was dead in bed. All of his possessions, what few he had, were gone. Mitch began searching the building for the man that he suspected had done the dirty deed, but he could find no trace of him anywhere. This led to Mitch being quite thoroughly guilt-ridden, knowing that if he had followed the rules and ejected the troublemaker, this other man might still have been alive today. Now, go out there and have a happy Thanksgiving, knowing what adventures others have had on this day that we're all supposed to be grateful for what we have. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.